Ibex held the cliff spring the way a gatekeeper holds a doorway, quietly, without drama, and with just enough presence that everything else waited its turn. The spring wasn't a river. It wasn't even a stream most days. It was a thin, steady seep coming out of limestone halfway up the canyon wall above Kamar Valley, where the cliffs rose in pale layers and the wind always seemed to find a way through. Water gathered there in a shallow rock bowl no bigger than a cooking pot, then overflowed in a narrow trickle that darkened the stone for a few feet before disappearing into gravel. For wildlife, that seep mattered more than a wide river down below. Rivers were contested. Rivers were loud with humans, washing, pumping, livestock, engines. The cliff spring was hard to reach, and that difficulty protected it. Only the animals that belonged on rock could claim it. Ibex belonged on rock. Khaled Mansour first learned about the cliff spring from an old shepherd named Sadiq, who spoke about water the way some people spoke about family, by name, by memory, by respect. "Don't bring your goats up there," Sadiq warned him one afternoon at the valley market, leaning on his staff and squinting as if he could see the cliff from here. "The ibex are holding it." Khaled had smiled politely at the time, thinking it sounded like superstition. Animals didn't hold water like men held land. Animals came, drank, left. But Khaled was new to this work in a way that made him humble enough to listen. He had moved back to Kamar Valley after working in the city for a few years. He'd come home because his mother was getting older and because the valley jobs that paid in cash were limited. He'd taken a role with the local conservation office, part ranger, part community liaison, part problem solver. His tasks were practical: check camera traps, monitor illegal grazing, help mediate disputes between herders and wildlife, and keep a running report on water points in drought months. This was a drought month. The rains had missed the valley twice in a row. The lower reservoirs were shallow. The pasture had turned brittle. Goats still found something to chew, because goats always found something, but the sheep were suffering, and the cattle were being moved farther out each week. Water points became everything. So when Sadiq said, "Ibex are holding it," Khaled didn't laugh. He wrote it down. 2 days later, Khaled stood at the base of the canyon wall with his binoculars and a sun-warmed canteen, staring up at a band of rock that looked impossible to climb. "You're sure it's there?" his co-worker Layla asked, shading her eyes. Khaled nodded. "Sadiq's sure," he said, "and the camera trap data shows ibex activity on the ledge line." Layla made a skeptical sound. "If there's water halfway up that wall, it's the safest water in the whole valley," she said. "That's why we're here," Khaled replied. They had hiked in early, before the heat turned the canyon into an oven. The path was narrow and stony, winding between scrub and boulders. Above them, the cliff face rose in slabs, with ledges like shelves where only birds and rock goats belonged. Khaled lifted his binoculars and scanned slowly. At first he saw nothing but stone, then movement, so subtle he almost missed it. A tan shape blending into rock, a curve that wasn't limestone, a horn line that caught sunlight. Ibex, one, then another, then several. They were clustered near a small ledge that, from this distance, looked like it couldn't hold a cat, let alone a hoofed animal. But the ibex stood there easily, bodies angled into the slope, hooves placed with casual precision. And at the center of them, right at the darker stain of wet rock, stood a large male. Khaled's breath caught. The bull ibex was bigger than the others by a full level of authority. His shoulders were thick. His neck looked like it had been carved from the same stone he stood on. His horns rose in a heavy sweep, ridged and curved back, making him look older and more experienced than the rest. He faced outward, not toward the spring, but toward the approach line along the ledge, like he was positioned to see anyone who tried to come in. He didn't drink. He watched. Layla lowered her binoculars slowly. "That's not random," she murmured. "No," Khaled agreed, voice quiet. "That's control." Below, in the valley, there was another sign that matched Sadiq's warning. A herd of goats and sheep clustered near the lower path, restless and thirsty, but refusing to move down into the canyon bottom where the main river ran. Normally, herders brought animals down in the morning and up again by noon. The river was inconvenient, but reliable. The animals didn't like steep paths, but hunger and thirst made them obey. Today, they wouldn't descend. They stopped at the slope line and milled, bleeding, heads lifting toward the cliffs as if listening for something. Their herder, Sadiq himself, stood with his staff planted, watching them with a grim expression like a man negotiating with stubborn relatives. Khaled and Lila approached him carefully. Sadiq didn't look surprised to see them. He looked like he'd expected them. "You see," Sadiq said before Khaled could speak. He nodded toward the herd. "They smell the cats." Khaled frowned. "Cats?" he asked. Sadiq jerked his chin toward the canyon shadows. "Leopard," he said. "Or wolves. Something is down there. They won't go." Khaled's stomach tightened. That made sense. Goats were brave, but they were not stupid. They refused dangerous paths when fear outweighed thirst. If a predator was working the canyon bottom, the herd would hesitate. Layla glanced at the cliffs. "So they want the spring," she said. Sadiq's eyes narrowed. "They always want the spring," he replied. "But it's not for them." Khaled looked up again, binoculars returning to the ledge. The Ibex group shifted slightly, bodies moving like a slow tide. A female stepped forward and drank from the seep, quick and efficient. Then she stepped back. Another took her place. Orderly, the bull remained at the edge, watching, ears turning. Khaled suddenly understood why the lower herd wouldn't descend. The only safe water they could reach was guarded by terrain and by the animals that owned that terrain. The cliff spring was a refuge, and the Ibex had made it theirs. But how exactly did they hold it? Ibex weren't wolves. They didn't hunt. They didn't chase animals off with teeth. They held it with position, with horns. With the simple fact that on that ledge, an Ibex had advantage over anything else with hooves. A goat could climb, but not like that. Sheep couldn't even try. A person could climb if desperate, but it would be slow and noisy. The Ibex could stand there all day and watch every approach. Khaled watched as a young Ibex, smaller horns, slimmer body, attempted to step closer to the spring out of turn. It edged forward, head low, trying to slip in. The bull turned. Not fast, not aggressive. Just turned his head and angled his horns slightly toward the young one. The young Ibex froze. Then it stepped back, obedient. No fight, no crash. Just a decision made by the animal with the strongest claim. "That's what Sadiq meant," Layla whispered. Khaled nodded. "They're regulating access," he said, amazed despite himself. Down below, Sadiq's herd bleated louder, the sound echoing off rock. A few goats began stepping toward the canyon path, testing. Then they stopped again, ears swiveling, bodies stiff. Fear tugged them back. Sadiq sighed and looked at Khaled. "If they don't drink today," he said quietly, "some will drop by tomorrow." Khaled felt the weight of that sentence like a stone. Water wasn't abstract here. It was survival measured in hours. "We can open the emergency troughs near the road," Khaled said, thinking out loud. "The ones by the checkpoint." Sadiq's face tightened. "And then everyone comes," he said. "And the water is finished in one day, and the fighting starts." Khaled knew he was right. Emergency troughs drew every herd, every argument. They were a short-term solution that created long-term conflict. The cliff spring was a steady trickle. The troughs were a loud invitation. Layla looked between the herd and the cliffs. "What if we create a safer descent path?" she suggested. "Clear brush, make the canyon bottom less ambush-friendly. If predators are the reason they won't go, reduce the risk." Sadiq gave her a tired look. "You can't clear a leopard," he said. "No," Layla agreed. "But we can increase visibility. Sometimes that's enough." Khalid was already imagining the work, trimming thorn scrub, removing hiding pockets, placing noise lines, small things that changed predator advantage. It would take time they didn't have. He lifted his binoculars again and saw the bull ibex drink for the first time, just a few quick pulls from the seep. Then he stepped back to his guard position, as if to prove his point. The water is here because we keep it safe and we decide how it's shared. Khalid felt a strange mix of admiration and frustration. Admiration for an animal society that maintained order at a critical resource. Frustration because human societies struggled to do the same without shouting. A movement in the canyon bottom caught his eye, shadows slipping between boulders. Too low to see clearly, but his instincts sharpened. He lowered the binoculars and looked at Layla. "Something's down there," he said. Layla's face tightened. "Predator?" she asked. Khalid nodded. "Probably," he said, "and that's why the herd won't go." Sadiq didn't look surprised. "I told you," he said, and tapped his staff against the ground once, like punctuation. Khalid's radio crackled faintly at his shoulder. Another patrol checking in, asking about water points. He answered quickly, then clicked it off, eyes returning to the scene. The valley had turned into a triangle of tension. Predator below, livestock above, Ibex holding the only safe seep on a cliff ledge, and in the middle of it was Khalid, tasked with keeping peace between needs that didn't negotiate politely. He looked at the herd again, goats shifting, tongues out, eyes dull. He looked up at the Ibex, calm, organized, sure of their advantage. Khalid realized the immediate problem wasn't just water, it was access. If the herd wouldn't descend, and the Ibex wouldn't yield, then humans would do what humans always did under pressure: climb, reach, and take. Someone would try to reach that cliff spring, either to drink, to fill a container, or to push the Ibex off so goats could get in, and that would end badly, for the goats, for the Ibex, for whoever slipped on rock. Khalid turned to Sadiq. "Has anyone tried to go up there?" he asked. Sadiq's eyes went dark. "Not yet," he said. "But they will. Tonight or tomorrow. Someone desperate." Layla looked at Khalid. "We need to get ahead of that," she said. Khalid nodded, feeling the urgency settle into focus. "We do," he replied. He looked up one more time at the bull Ibex holding his position at the cliff spring. The animal didn't know about committees, or policies, or drought plans. It knew one thing: water and rock belonged to those who could stand on them. And right now, the Ibex could stand where no one else could. The herd below, thirsty and stubborn, watched the cliff like it was watching a locked door. And Khalid understood that if the door stayed locked much longer, someone would try to break it. Khalid didn't leave the canyon right away. He stayed where the path widened into a small overlook and watched the ledge until his eyes started to ache from the glare. He wasn't waiting for a miracle. He was waiting for a clue, something that told him what would happen next before it happened. Out here, being late was the same as being wrong. Above, the Ibex routine continued with the calm rhythm of animals that had done this 1,000 times. One drank, stepped back, another took its place. The bull held the approach line like a quiet wall. It wasn't violence, it was structure. Below, Sadiq's herd shifted in restless waves. A few goats tried the descent again, only to stop and back up, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. Fear was a physical thing in them now, like a rope pulling them uphill. Even the sheep, usually slow to react, stayed bunched close to the higher slope, as if the ground itself were dangerous. Layla moved along the edge of the path and scanned the canyon bottom through binoculars. "I don't see it," she said, but her voice had the same tightness Khalid felt. "You won't," Sadiq replied. "You only see it when it wants you to." Khalid knew that could mean leopard, but it could also mean something less dramatic: feral dogs, wolves, even a person moving carefully. In drought months, humans became part of the predator equation in ways no one liked admitting. He radioed the conservation office anyway, keeping his message factual. Gate area at Kamar Cliff Spring, active with Ibex. Livestock herd refusing descent. Possible predator presence in canyon bottom. Recommend additional patrol on lower path and road approach. Static, then a crackling acknowledgement. Nothing more. The office was stretched thin. They'd send someone if they could. Khaled looked at Sadiq. "If they won't descend," he said, "how far can you move them today?" Sadiq's mouth tightened. "Not far," he said. "They'll graze a little, but they need water. They won't last the afternoon." Khaled felt the decision forming like a knot. He didn't want to open the emergency troughs. Sadiq was right. Everyone would come. Arguments would start before the first bucket finished pouring. But doing nothing meant animals suffering, and suffering always spilled into conflict too. Layla spoke quietly, as if offering something fragile. "What if we don't open the big troughs?" she said. "But we set a small temporary point, just enough for this herd, away from the station road so it doesn't advertise itself." Sadiq gave her a skeptical look. "Water smells," he said. "Word travels." Khaled nodded. "But we can choose where it travels," he said. He stared up at the ledge again, then down at the shadowed canyon bottom. "And we can make the descent less scary. Not perfect, just less." Layla understood immediately. "Visibility," she said. Khalid turned and started walking along the upper path, looking for the right section of canyon to work on. Not the whole thing, just the choke point where the herd always hesitated, where boulders and scrub created a perfect hiding seam. They found it within 10 minutes, a tight bend where the path narrowed between a rock outcrop and a thicket of thorny shrubs. From above, it looked harmless. From the herd's eye level, it was a blind corner. Khalid crouched and studied it, the way his father used to study a bad road curve, imagining what could be hidden, where an ambush could launch, where feet could slip. "We clear that," he said, pointing at the thicket. "Not all vegetation, just enough to open sight lines." Layla nodded. "And we place something that makes noise if anything moves through," she added. Sadiq watched them, tired skepticism on his face. "You think goats will trust a noise line?" he asked. "They trust information," Khalid said. "Right now they have none. Just fear." He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed his machete from his pack, standard issue for trails and invasive brush, and started cutting. Thorn branches snapped and fell. The smell was sharp and green. His hands burned where thorns scratched through gloves. Layla joined in with pruning shears from her kit, working fast and clean. Sadiq didn't cut, but he helped by dragging branches away from the path and stacking them into a rough barrier that forced movement into the open center line. He grumbled the whole time, but his hands kept moving, which was as close to agreement as Khalid expected from him. They worked for nearly an hour. The sun rose higher. Heat crept into the canyon. When they finally stepped back, the bend looked different. Wider, brighter, less like a mouth. Khalid took a coil of old rope from Sadiq's pack. Every herder carried rope like they carried water, and ran it between two rocks at chest height, tying empty tin cups and a few metal rings to it. When the line moved, it clinked and rattled. Not an alarm bell, Just an interruption of silence. "This won't stop a predator," Khaled said. Sadiq snorted. "Nothing stops them," he muttered. "But it changes the timing," Khaled replied. "And it tells the herd something moved." Layla stepped back and looked at the cleared bend. "We should also avoid sending them down at the same time every day," she said. "Predators learn schedules." Sadiq's eyes narrowed. "So my goats must have a plan, and the leopard can have no plan," he said dryly. Khaled almost smiled. "Something like that," he admitted. They walked back up to the herd line and tested the descent with a few goats first. Sadiq whistled and coaxed his lead doe, a tough, angular animal with a torn ear, toward the path. The doe stepped forward, stopped, sniffed, then hesitated at the bend. Sadiq clicked his tongue. The doe took one more step. The rope line stayed quiet. The bend was open enough now that the doe could see through it, not just into it. She stared down the path, ears forward, then stepped again. 2 goats followed, then 5. Not a stampede, nothing dramatic, just a slow loosening of fear. The herd began to stretch, creating a line rather than a tight knot. That alone changed the dynamic. Tight clusters panicked, stretched lines evaluated. Khaled watched, feeling cautious hope. He knew this might fail the moment a shadow moved wrong. But it was movement. They guided the herd down for another 15 minutes. The canyon bottom came into better view. Gravel bars, shallow water, boulders that held cool pockets of shade. It was exactly the kind of place a leopard could live unseen. Then the rope line rattled. Clink, 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 soft, but sharp enough in the quiet. The lead doe froze. The herd stopped behind her like a wave meeting a wall. Khaled's muscles tightened. He scanned the bend. A small movement flashed between stones, quick, low, not leopard. A jackal. It trotted across the path, paused to look back with bright eyes, then slipped into brush. A harmless thief compared to a leopard, but still a predator, still a reason for goats to doubt. Sadiq exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "Always something," he muttered. But the important thing was this. The herd had stopped, assessed, and stayed. They hadn't bolted uphill. They hadn't collapsed into chaos. They were learning that the canyon bottom didn't equal death every time. Sadiq whistled again, low and steady. The lead doe stepped forward. The herd followed. Khaled felt his shoulders drop slightly. Down by the river, the goats drank fast and greedily, noses pushing into shallow water, hooves slipping on stones. Sheep followed, slower, more cautious, then finally drank too. The sound of it, dozens of animals drinking, filled the canyon like relief. Khaled didn't relax fully. Drinking was the dangerous moment. Heads down meant awareness down. Predators knew that. He and Layla stayed slightly apart, scanning opposite directions. Sadiq stood upright with his staff planted, eyes moving constantly. He looked less like an old man now, and more like what he truly was, a professional in a landscape that didn't forgive mistakes. They got away with it. For today. When the herd had drunk enough, Sadiq moved them back up before heat peaked. They climbed, slower now, bellies full of water. The rope line rattled once when a goat brushed it, then went quiet. The herd passed the bend without bunching. At the upper slope, Sadiq turned to Khaled, expression still hard, but a different kind of hard. "That helped," he admitted, and for Sadiq that was a generous sentence. Khaled nodded. "It buys time," he said. Sadiq looked up toward the cliff ledge, where the ibex were still visible as pale shapes against stone. "And the spring?" he asked, voice low. Khaled followed his gaze. The bull was still there, still holding. The Ibex Society hadn't changed because humans cleared a bend. They were still in command of the safest water point on the cliff. "We leave it alone," Khaled said firmly. Sadiq's eyes narrowed. "You say that," he replied, "but not everyone listens." Khaled knew. Word about the cliff spring would spread because drought made people talk. Someone would try climbing with a jerry can. Someone would try pushing goats up, thinking hunger and thirst could force rock skill. Someone would try doing it at night. Khaled and Layla hiked back toward their truck, tired and scratched. On the way out, they stopped at a small ridge where the path overlooked the lower access road. A vehicle was parked there that hadn't been there earlier, a dusty pickup with two men standing beside it. They weren't herders. Their clothes were too clean for that. One had binoculars. The other had a backpack that looked heavy. They were looking up at the cliffs, not at the herd, at the Ibex ledge. Khaled's stomach tightened. "Do you know them?" Layla asked quietly. Khaled shook his head. "No," he said. They waited a moment, watching from concealment behind a boulder. The men didn't approach the herd. They didn't call out. They simply studied the ledge and pointed, talking in short bursts. Then one of them raised a phone and took photos. Layla's voice dropped. "Tourists?" she asked, hopeful. Khaled didn't like hoping without evidence. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe not." In drought months, people who just look could be birders, hunters, or something darker. The difference wasn't always obvious from a distance. Khaled took out his own phone and zoomed in to capture the license plate, hands steady. He got a clear shot. Then he watched as the men got back into the pickup and drove off, not toward the village, but along the service road that led toward the pan station and old quarry, areas few tourists chose because there was nothing to buy there. Layla looked at him. "We report," she said. "We report," Khaled agreed. Back at the conservation office, Khaled filed a short incident note with the plate number and the location, then walked straight to the water point board and pinned a new sheet under Kamar Valley. Cliff spring active. Ibex controlling access. Livestock refusal to descend, likely predator-related. Temporary mitigation. Cleared visibility at Bend 2 plus noise line. Monitor. It looked small on paper. A few lines. But Khaled felt the real situation growing in layers. Predator pressure, livestock stress, human desperation, wildlife concentration at water, unknown visitors observing. That evening, Khaled returned to his mother's house and found her sitting outside, sorting lentils in a shallow tray. She glanced up at his scratched forearms and frowned. "You've been fighting bushes," she said, half amused. "Bushes and fear," Khaled replied, sitting on the step. His mother clicked her tongue. "Fear is harder to cut," she said. He smiled faintly. "Yes," he admitted. She glanced toward the mountains. "Your uncle says the men from the city will come soon," she said casually, like mentioning weather. "The ones who buy meat, who buy horns, who buy anything." Khaled's smile vanished. "Who said that?" he asked. His mother shrugged. "People talk," she said. "They always do when the rains fail." Khaled sat very still, listening to the evening sounds, distant goats, a radio somewhere, the small clink of pots. He had a plate number. He had a cliff spring full of ibex. He had herds that wouldn't descend unless the canyon felt safe. And now he had the oldest warning system in the valley. His mother's people talk. The next day, Khaled returned before first light with Layla and one additional ranger, Faris, who carried a camera and moved with quiet competence. They parked their truck farther back from the canyon to avoid advertising their presence and hiked in with headlamps low. The ibex were already there, silhouettes on the ledge against a paling sky. The bull held the same position as yesterday, proof that holding wasn't a metaphor. It was a schedule. Khalid and his team stayed below, watching, and then, just after dawn, they saw movement on a lower side path. Two figures climbing, not herders, no animals with them. Just two men with plastic containers slung by rope and a folded ladder section on one shoulder, moving with the focused impatience of people who believed they had found a shortcut to survival. Lila's voice was tight. "They're going up," she whispered. Khalid felt the moment crystallize. This was what Sadiq had warned about, someone desperate enough to try breaking the locked door. Khalid raised his hand, signaling Faris and Layla to stay low. Then he stepped onto the path openly, just enough to be seen, and called out in a calm, carrying voice. "Morning! That ledge is dangerous. Turn back!" The men froze. One of them lifted his head sharply, eyes narrowing in the dim light. For a second, Khalid saw the calculation. Can we ignore him? Can we outrun him? Can we bluff? Khalid didn't move closer. He didn't threaten. He simply stood in the open, making himself part of the landscape the same way the bull Ibex did. Faris and Layla shifted behind him, visible now too. Three figures, radios on shoulders, official posture without aggression. The men exchanged a quick look. One of them called back, "We just want water." Khalid nodded once. "There is water down below," he replied. "We can escort you to the safe descent and the river." The man shook his head. "Predators," he snapped. "We're not stupid." Khalid kept his voice steady. "Neither are the Ibex," he said. "And if you spook them, someone falls. Maybe you, maybe them. Then there's blood, and everyone loses." The men hesitated again. The ladder section dipped as the carrier adjusted his grip. Their confidence wasn't as solid as their desperation. Khalid took a small step forward, careful, not threatening, then stopped. "If you need water for your family," he said, "come with us. We'll help. But you don't climb that spring." For a long moment, the only sound was wind in the canyon and the distant bleating of Sadiq's herd somewhere above. Then one man cursed softly and turned around. The other followed, shoulders tight with frustration. They descended without looking back. Khalid watched them go, relief mixing with worry. He'd stopped them today because he'd been there. He couldn't be there every day. Layla exhaled. "So now what?" she asked. Khalid looked up at the bull Ibex still holding the ledge, then down at the canyon path they'd cleared, then out toward the valley where thirst would keep sharpening every decision. "We build a better option," he said quietly, "before someone tries again with more anger." He didn't know yet what better would look like. An alternate trough with controlled access, a scheduled water delivery, a guarded descent corridor, a community rotation plan. But he knew one thing for certain now. The Ibex would keep holding the cliff spring because it could. The herds would keep refusing to descend when they sensed danger because they should. And humans would keep testing the boundary between survival and recklessness until someone gave them a safer way to live. Khalid turned back toward the valley, already planning his next conversation with the village council, with the water office, with Sadiq, with anyone who could help distribute pressure, so the cliff spring stayed what it was meant to be, a refuge on rock, not a battlefield.